Good evening and welcome to our Lions Quest family night for this evening. Uh, can you, Miss Hunley, are you able to see if people are on at the same time? Sorry, this is our first YouTube live Lions Quest. Get excited. So, bear with us as we move through this. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about September is Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. Suicide is something that is prevalent. It's, around. And while it might be the Prevention and Awareness Month, it's something that we should talk about typically and something that we're comfortable with, but we know it's also uncomfortable to talk about. So much of the suicide prevention depends on the preparing for the crisis before it happens. And so that's why we wanted to have this night in order to kind of go through and educate some more and kind of talk about it, to open up the doors, to have more conversations about that. Both Miss Bausch and I were talking just this afternoon about, while we are both mental health professionals, that this is a hard subject to talk about, and it's also different for different people, and we don't anticipate or expect anybody to have all the answers or to always see it, but we're hoping that, and by having these conversations and inviting you guys in and being willing to talk about it, it opens the doors for more people to be willing to say or share if they are feeling suicidal or having suicidation or suicidal thoughts. Then that way we are able to get more people help. And so that's just kind of our hopes for tonight. It doesn't mean that everyone will always know and that it's on you to always stop it all. It's so hard to know that, but we want to be resources for you, and we want to open that door for conversations. So with that being said, one other thing before I even go into any more is that we will be releasing more information coming up of our new Stop It program that we are implementing. And there's an app for it. And so it's like this great little poster says, with Stop It, you have the power to protect yourself and others from harmful, inappropriate, or unsafe behaviors. So just like it'll help us report some of those behaviors and get that information to some of the adults or other people that can get those students help or get other people in the community's help, because we can't hear everything all the time. So we are asking our students, and they will have this information. We will be gathering it and putting it out more in the next week. And so that stuff will be coming soon. Look for it. We are very excited to have it. And hopefully that'll also help with all of this. All right. Okay. So just starting with the facts. A lot of the information I used for tonight came from nomoreks.org. And they had a lot of great suicide prevention for the month of September. A lot of social media stuff that was shared, because as middle schoolers, we don't use our phones here at school. We are not using a lot of that stuff because we don't have our phones out. So I thought some of this great information was here. So a lot of the information can be found there. So just so you have that info. The facts that I found most fascinating or just wanted to make sure that we highlighted were 28.69% of Kansas teens reported that they had seriously considered suicide. 53.8% of Kansas young adults reported that they or someone close to them had been concerned about their mental health at least once in the past month. Why I think these facts are so important is because they're actually from our KCTC data for the state of Kansas, and those are the surveys that our actual students fill out. So it's coming from our students that are telling us these things.
So like Ms. Douglas had already talked about, just opening the conversation to talk about suicidal ideations, there's the common phrase, name it to tame it. So if we're able to call it what it is and say that if a kid is having suicidal ideations, if we're able to identify that, then we can take the steps to not even prevent it, but just to address it. this list over here is a list of core emotions from Brene Brown. And Ms. Douglas and I had talked about how suicidal ideations, it's more of an emotion. If we think of it as an emotion, it can be easier to talk about and easier to address. So all these emotions, like there's a lot of these can be what is behind having suicidal ideation. There's anger, there's embarrassment, there's a feeling of being overwhelmed, there's vulnerability. So we don't always have to think of the suicidal ideations as an action. If we think of it more as an emotion and we name it as that, we can take steps to address it and to tame that emotion and bring it down to more of a natural, just a feeling that we can overcome.
And how to cope with it, I think, yeah.
Yeah.
So just like we talked about with the feeling, you had the whole list of feelings and how even in just one instance, you can have a feeling of being mad. You can have the feeling of being ashamed, embarrassed. But if you have the correct coping skills or the healthy coping skills to work through those, it's easier for you to move past that. So let's say that you don't have those coping skills or you're not sure how to move past that. This is just kind of an example of, let's say that you're mad and it grows to be anger, or you don't have the healthy coping skill to process that anger or process through what you're mad about or what is it that's making you mad. This can also lead to unsafe actions or violence towards yourself or others. So again, just touching base about one thing that has helped me in talking with students is suicide's a very heavy topic. And one of the things that kids have said to me is that I don't know why they would ever want to kill themselves, or I don't know how they would ever want to die. And while that's a very valid thought and feeling, we don't know necessarily why people feel like they don't want to live any longer. And so we don't want other people to be ashamed of that. So if we think of it more of a feeling, you would never say to somebody, well, why are you happy? Because it's a feeling. You can't help some of your feelings. And so if we're able to process that like as a feeling, then it makes it more easy for us to say, well, maybe I'm missing this coping skill, or I'm not really sure how to cope with this. And then I can move past that. So I think in my experience, it's been easier to talk about with kids in that aspect because it makes it seem like something at some point we can control and we can bring back down. Because I think the act of suicide has a finality, but having the feelings of it doesn't always have to lead to the finality of it. And so being able to talk about it gets to that. So I think that's just the most important part of knowing, like, you're not alone, and just how do we have those conversations of it's a feeling, we've got to work through it. How do we keep you safe through it? How do we admit those feelings? How do we know if that's what we're feeling? And who do we go to if we're feeling that way? I think that's another huge thing is what are our resources? Because a lot of times when you say, I don't want to live anymore, that's very upsetting for other people. But that's more, it's just, we have to figure out, okay, just like if you said, I have a stomach ache. Well, we'll go to the doctor. If you don't want to live anymore, we will figure out what's going on behind that and how we can help figure out how to move past that or how to cope with that or how do we go through this. So we're talking a lot about talking, but I think that that's the most important thing of talking about suicide is that we don't talk about it. And it is a very hard topic to talk about because death is very sad and scary. And especially in young kids, like that's not what we consider to be normal. And so we don't know where to go with it.
There's also the misconception that if you bring it up, you're going to cause it. Like if you are to talk about it with your child, there's the misconception that if you bring it up with your child, that they're going to act upon that. And studies have shown that that is not the case.
So I found this with reporting on suicide.org, which is really for more media or for companies or schools on like how to deal with some of this stuff. But I just found some of their points to just be so applicable and how we are having our everyday conversations. And I guess because of in the middle school and having celebrities who may commit who die by suicide, and how do we have that conversation? So I think just in how we talk about it. So suicide is a public health issue, and how we talk about it is important. So they just have these kind of little pointers, and I just really want to touch base on them because they talk about big or sensationalized headlines or prominent placement. So, I mean, again, this was about a newspaper, but saying that Kurt Cobain used a shotgun to commit suicide. Instead of that, what if we said inform the audience without sensationalizing the suicide and minimize the prominence? So, I mean, people will need to know that somebody passed. And so how is it that we share that information? So their idea would say Kurt Cobain died at 27. Describing recent suicides as an epidemic, skyrocketing, or other strong terms. Making sure that we carefully investigate the most recent CDC data, which is the Center for Disease Control, and use non-sensational words like rise or higher. Describing a suicide as inexplicable or without warning. Most, but not all, people who die by suicide exhibit warning signs, and we'll talk about these too, which so making sure that you include or talk about what the warning signs are and what to do if you are experiencing suicidation or suicidal thoughts. And then referring to suicide as successful, unsuccessful, or a failed attempt, which I think you guys may have just heard me had to correct myself and back up, because this is something even I don't always do right. But describing it as instead as died by suicide or completed or killed himself or herself. So there's not that successful, unsuccessful term with it.
So the warning signs for suicide, I'm going to go through each bullet. I don't know how easy it is to see on YouTube. So one of the warning signs down here is just a sign of like hopelessness. They express no reason for living, no sense of purpose in life. They have rage, anger, and they're trying to seek revenge. There's recklessness or risky behavior, and often it seems like they do that without thinking. They have expressed feeling trapped, like there's no way out. There's could be an increase in alcohol or drug use. They may withdraw from friends, family, or society. They could have more anxiety, agitation, inability to sleep, or constant sleeping. There could be dramatic mood changes. And then there could be no reason for living or no sense of purpose in life. And then at the top, we have the hotline for suicide prevention up there. It's 1-800-273-TALK or 8255. And you want to call that when you hear or see any one of these behaviors. Someone threatening to hurt or kill themselves. Someone looking for ways to kill themselves if they have access to pills, weapons, or other means. Especially if you see any of these warning signs and they have access to those things, it's important to take measures to try to prevent that from happening. And then also if you see or hear about someone talking or writing about death, dying, or suicide, when those actions are out of the ordinary for that person. One that's not up here that is really common is people giving away things that mean a lot to them. So if they have, I don't know, what's an example?
Like their iPod.
Okay, yeah, if they really value their like their video game system or something that they've really cherished from a family member, and they're trying to give those things away to other people, that's a big sign that they could be contemplating suicide.
I think the other thing as parents that you guys should be really proud of, and I think just knowing this, our middle schoolers are really good about sharing this information with Miss Hunley, with myself, with Miss Bausch. And then now with our Stop It program. This will also be another outlet for them if they have a peer or hear of a peer who's doing this. But also, again, just keeping that reminder of like, if this is being said, whether it's a joke or not a joke, we're not taking it as a joke, because sometimes they're saying it as a joke when inside they are feeling those ways. And so it's important for us to take it seriously, so that even if we're asking the questions and they, oh, it's nothing, if we're not asking the questions, then we're not making the conversation. So I think that's super important.
Okay, so the next slide is risk factors, and there is a disclaimer at the top that these are not necessarily, they don't mean that the person is contemplating suicide, but instead they are just, these are characteristics of someone who would be at a higher risk for contemplating suicide. So on the left here, we have health factors. We have mental health conditions, which include a lot of these: depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, borderline or antisocial personality disorder, conduct disorder, psychotic disorders, anxiety disorders, substance use disorders, or any serious or chronic health conditions or pain. Those put people at a higher risk for contemplating suicide. Environmental factors. Contagion would include exposure to another person's suicide or to graphic or sensationalized accounts of suicide, which is exactly what Ms. Douglas was talking about on a previous slide about those headlines. You know, when it's glorified and kids are reacting to that, that puts them at a higher risk. If they have access to lethal means, which we kind of touched on too, including firearms, drugs, prescription pills, anything like that. Prolonged stress factors, which could include harassment, bullying, relationship problems, or unemployment for older adult. And then stressful life events, which could include death, family divorce, parent job loss. Again, those are just factors that could increase the risk. And then historical factors is the last part down here. If there were previous suicide attempts, statistically, they are at a higher rate or higher risk of attempting suicide again. And then if there's a family history of suicide attempts, that also increases their risk. So we really love this graphic. Miss Douglas did a great job making it. So one thing that I wanted to touch base on was just the difference between sadness and depression. So in the graphic, you can see sadness is just like the small cloud. So it's important to know that sadness is natural. Sadness is a human emotion, and that is completely normal. But then as the cloud gets thicker and thicker and thicker, we kind of get to depression. And depression is different from sadness in that it's a constant state, and it interferes with a person's day-to-day living. So we don't want parents to like freak out that their kid is all of a sudden sad. And while we still want you to have this conversation with your kids, it's not necessarily something to be really nervous about when they're just feeling sad, and it's kind of situational. When they are more depressed and it's more of a constant thing, we want to have that conversation even more about if they're having suicidal thoughts. And really, when they're feeling depressed, it's probably time to get them some kind of help. Yeah, help them feel better.
So safety plans are just like we do fire drills, we do tornado drills. You know, we set up all these kind of examples of like, this is what we do in case of an emergency. Safety plans are a good idea for you to just kind of know and talk about with your kids. So safety plans are associated with a reduction in suicidal behavior and increased treatment engagement, according to No More Kansas. So this is an example of one. There are lots of different ones. If you are interested in more, please don't hesitate to reach out to Ms. Bausch or I. And we will also have these resources available online. But this just kind of goes through, it has the warning signs, thoughts, images, mood, situation, behavior that a crisis may be developing. So if you have, sometimes we have SAD, seasonal affectiveness disorder, right? Okay.
Yeah.
And so in the winter months, because there's not as much sun, sometimes that affects people different ways. So some people already know in the winter months, I know I need more self-care, or I'm going to need to go to therapy a few more times, or I just need a little bit more of my mental health care plan. So in that area is where some kids would write, or family would write, in the winter months, or if it's been rainy all week. Or let's say that my parents just got divorced. And so I know that in the days leading up to switching houses, I just get a little worried. Then that might be a warning sign. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we're having suicidal thoughts. Just knowing what some triggers are that may trigger some different emotion, I think, is the big thing there. I don't want to say that there's good and bad emotions, because I love all emotions. You ask your kids, I'm really great at crying. Because I think that that's okay. Like, and it's okay to have an emotion. So being able to witness or know what is your trigger. If I haven't slept or if I have a headache, there's a good chance I'm going to cry at some point, because that's how I know I feel. So there's my trigger. Like, I'm tired, hungry, have a headache. There's my trigger. So that's a warning sign, right? So that's a good sign to know, like, what am I going to need to do there? So then what are my internal coping strategies? Things that I can do to take my mind off the problem without contacting another person. So how is it that I can do self-care? Is there meditation that I can do? For me, it's yoga. Sometimes it is meditation. Sometimes it's a nap. Sometimes it's a Hershey's bar. Just kind of depends. But knowing what those are and writing them down, because just like we write down our fire plan, or we know what those things are, writing them down also helps us to learn them and know about ourselves.
I do want to point out too that this can be a living document. So as you get to know yourself better and as you try these strategies out, you can adjust and keep it up to date as you go along.
Yeah. Then what are the people and social settings that provide a distraction? People whom I can ask for help. Suicidation and suicidal thoughts are something that I understand and I think are very important for us to talk about. So I think it's important for you to know who is it that you can go to and know, I'm going to say to that person, I feel suicidal, or I am having a suicidation. And it doesn't matter, like, that person's going to say, okay, and they're not going to leave your side. So as an adult, knowing, like, if your kid comes to you, maybe you need to tap out for that moment because you are the parent and that's going to be hard. Who is it that you can call so you know your child's safe with them right now and you can get the resources available for the next step there? So having that conversation, but also knowing that your child is able to talk to somebody or say that, no, I don't want to live anymore today, or I feel like I don't have a purpose. Because I think it's important to say those things out loud. And knowing that I know that I can go to Miss Bausch and say, this is how I feel today. And she isn't going to try to fix it for me right then. She's going to listen to me and she's going to help me get the next steps, because she can't fix feelings, right? Like, we have to work how to cope through it. She can give me suggestions, but sometimes I may just need to say it out loud for a minute. So writing these things out, I just think is super important. And then also knowing and having that conversation of who are those people? Who are the people around you that you trust? Step 5 is the crisis. And I think this is more for your, like, home plan, and just so you guys know as a family, who is it that your doctor is? Who is it that you would call? Do you have a family therapist? If you don't, or you just don't even know who you would call, who would Miss Bausch and Miss Douglas have a list of resources? We do. And we would be more than happy to give those numbers out. Like, so that way you just know those things, or you have them around in case anything were to happen. Maybe they won't. Maybe they will. But we've got that stuff, right? And then, of course, the Suicide Prevention Lifeline phone, so that we have that. And then making the environment safe. If you don't have the means to end your life readily available, it'll be harder to end your life. So if you don't have access to a gun, to pills, to things of that nature, it's harder to do that, right? So making sure that those things are locked up as a parent, so that way students don't have access to that. And then something that is important to me and worth living for. I think having those little reminders of like, I think this question is so important to ask, not in a crisis, because in a crisis it feels so heavy, you may not be able to answer what is important because you're in a crisis. But being able to have a little bit of a light and a hope that says like, no, I know that I loved this at one point and it'll be okay again. That's important. So if I am a student, I can encourage my friends that getting help for their life's ups and downs is the okay thing to do. Normalize going to see the counselor. Miss Douglas isn't that bad. Miss Bausch is pretty awesome. Like, it's more than okay to go help. Miss Hunley's pretty great too. Talking to people is great. Ask my friends if they have thoughts of hurting themselves. Miss Bausch will talk on this more. And I wanted to say a little bit earlier, it is okay to say, do you have thoughts of wanting to kill yourself? It's terrifying to say. Practice it in a mirror. Do some role playing at home, because it is very hard to ask, especially if somebody's crying.
Using that language, like it's very strong language to ask if they're thinking of killing themselves. That's a very strong word, but you want to avoid any confusion about what that means.
And it's
very clear what you're asking.
And it's really important to ask of, do you have thoughts of killing yourself? And it's not, you wouldn't have thoughts of killing yourself, would you? Or
you don't actually want to kill yourself.
You don't actually want to kill yourself.
You don't want it to be a leading question. Leave it open for them to answer.
So that way it's a very blunt, like, well, yeah. And I think by saying so bluntly, do you want to kill yourself? It kind of throws somebody off to say yes or no. And then it also helps them have that realization of like, oh, man, I'm in a really dark place. Like, we should probably ask some questions. So talking about how do we ask that, and that it takes practice. Share stories about times getting help share stories about times where getting help has worked. Talk to your doctor during your annual well visit. Break the stigma by encouraging discussion of mental wellness, which we've talked about. As a student or an adolescent, it is important to tell an adult, a parent, a guardian, a teacher, a counselor, a social worker. Use our Stop It app, because we can't help what we don't know about. And that's how we get people help, is by knowing about it and talking about it. And then being an example of kindness and connection to those who are around you.
Okay, so this slide is, if you are a parent, you can be willing to listen without judgment. And I think the most important thing here is to avoid phrases like, you've got so much going for you, why would you want to kill yourself? You know, like that. I think that's kind of our instinct whenever we hear that someone is having these thoughts and is wanting to kill themselves. But it can really be counterproductive. You're trying to make them feel better, but when they're in that place, they don't really want to hear that.
Because they don't know why they feel that way. They could probably tell you, I know I shouldn't want to kill myself. And I know it hurts your feelings when I tell you I want to kill myself. So if I say it to you and you start crying, and I've said this to students before, I'm crying because I'm upset that you're upset. I'm not crying. I'm crying because I hurt with you, not because I hurt for you, but because I do think it's natural to cry. Because it is very scary. But I think also just remembering, like, if no kid will ever tell you they want to feel that way. And so just reminding them, like, it's not your fault. We just have to figure out where to go and what to do.
Yeah. So a calm approach and just listening. I know that can be really uncomfortable for everyone, just to be a listening ear when you want to try to fix it. So that's the number one thing. You can be the one to help your child seek mental and physical health care when needed. And we've already talked about this, but you can store your firearms, prescriptions, over-the-counter medications safely at home, which would reduce the likelihood that they would be used in a suicide crisis. And then practice good self-care yourself. Share your coping mechanisms with your children and allow them to see what you do to take care of yourself. I know a lot of people, they feel vulnerable whenever they are trying to take care of themselves, so they might do it behind closed doors. Make that known. Like if you need to read a good book, or if you need to cry a little bit, just have those conversations with your kids and let them see you work through your problems successfully. I think that's really helpful for kids. If they can see someone that they love and respect go through these things and find a way to the other side, then they're more likely to do those things themselves. And maybe they'll find some new coping mechanisms that way also.
So lastly, we have our resources. The Kansas Suicide Prevention Resource Center has just tons of information. The KS No More KS has a ton of resources. The Brown Stanley Safety Plan is up there, but also I did not put the Stop It on there, but we will get that information shared. But also Miss Bausch and I are obviously here. Miss Douglas is who I am. School counselor, USD 337, social worker. That's what we're here for. And I know that this is uncomfortable and it's not fun, but it opens the doors for so many more conversations. And I think that's how we get the most help. And I think that's the big thing to remember is that there is hope somewhere. It's not always instant and it's not always easy, but there's hope, and that's what we're here for. And we want everyone to have that feeling, and we want to make sure that we can get those resources out and be there for you guys. So thank you guys so much for joining us this evening. This has been amazing. We are so excited for our year to start. We love having your kids here. Thank you for all your guys' support. Our next Lions Quest meeting is, I don't know, but we'll post that when we post this video because I did not do good at that. But thank you guys so much for joining us. Have a great rest of your evening. Night.